At 62 years young, retired journalist and college instructor Skye Dent enrolled as a residential college student at Cal State Bakersfield for the winter and spring term of 2017.
Most of the students, they knew I was older. They didn't know I was in my 60s because I have bangs to cover everything.
Dent moved to Kern County from the Bay Area for a lower cost of living and to be nearer to her family. Her plan was to teach high school, and she needed a single subject credential to do so. But right away, Dent was puzzled by one of the books her professor listed on the syllabus as required material for the class. It's sold in the school's bookstore for $65.
I had a hard time understanding what was taking place and what I was reading in this one.
The book she's referring to is called An Interactive Approach to Second Language Learning and Teaching, written by Mahmoud Solomon, at the time the chair of the university's Advanced Educational Studies Department. This is what was sold in the university bookstore. It's a digital version of the book. Now, once they had this, they could request a hard-bound copy of it by going to the code on the inside of this cover. Now, the versions are almost exactly the same. The content is. The one difference is that there are YouTube videos embedded in the digital copy of the book.
And I noticed that there were a lot of typos and grammar errors.
Here are a few examples of what she's talking about. These were pulled from the first 20 pages of the book. 2 references to United States of America, the word interpedently, improper uses of the words fraught and insinuation. Here's a sentence that mentions English language learners jumping from 5.5 to 5.3 million. Clearly another mix-up. There are many other missing or extra words and improper tense shifts. I took these concerns to university spokesman Michael Lukens.
We acknowledge that there are some editing issues involved in it.
I asked Lukens what the process looks like for a professor wishing to sell his or her work as required reading material. Who reviews it?
Yes, it would have been the credentialing faculty who would review the text and give the approval.
Lukens said the faculty determined Solomon to be a credible expert and the text would be cheaper than the previous book. He said they did identify the grammar and spelling issues, but approved the text with the understanding that they would be polished out during the publishing process. But that raised another question. This is a book that's been on the shelves for 3 years, correct?
Yes.
When did this miscommunication, when was that realized?
I don't know the answer to that. Students were able to use the text and were able to learn from it and learn the concepts and material that they were expected to learn as part of the course.
Is it not a fair expectation that the books not only have good content, but can also be presented in a way that makes sense and follows basic grammar?
I acknowledge the issues with the grammar, but you also have to keep in mind the content of the course, whether students are able to learn what's in it.
Yes, should they have to fight bad grammar to learn how to teach students?
I'm not going to get back and forth on whether they're fighting bad grammar. That I will say, yes, could it have been written better? Yes. Does it also include material that students apparently have been able to get through and to learn? I think in that respect, the text has probably done what it set out to do.
As a former journalist and college instructor going back to school, Skye Dent knew poor writing when she saw it.
It wasn't edited, it wasn't vetted.
And it turns out the university can recognize it too.
We acknowledge that there are some editing issues involved in it.
The author of the book published by National Social Science Press is Dr. Mahmoud Solomon, who at the time was the chair of the Advanced Educational Studies Department. The school reported to us that Solomon earned an $8 royalty for every one of the 392 copies that were sold, a total profit of more than $3,200. We tried to interview Dr. Solomon, but he gave us a written statement instead that said in part, quote, "I followed all campus policies," that he advised a special committee of his intent to sell his book, as well as the royalties he would collect, and the faculty approved it. As for the errors, he says, quote, "Unfortunately, many of my proposed changes were not incorporated in the final version, a version that was sold for 3 years." And beyond the grammar, Dent saw something else that concerned her.
If you looked at the photos and the illustrations, there were approximately 140 of them, and none of them had any credits. And some of them looked like photos that they were taken from newspapers, which I kind of felt was a copyright violation.
In an email after our interview, a university spokesman said that images and links were included by the publisher, not by Dr. Solomon, and he was told that they had secured permission. But for this particular photo, a reverse Google image search showed that it was taken by Lynn Sladke, an Associated Press photographer based in Miami. I asked the AP whether the National Social Science Press had been given a license to use the photo. Unless their application to use the photo was filed under a different name, the AP says they were not given permission. So I set out to talk to National Social Science Press, looking for info about their editing process, the photos they used, and some general information about who they are.
You have reached National Social Science Press. Please leave.
Calls to the phone number listed on their website weren't answered, but Dr. Solomon mentioned the director, a Dr. Jerry Beto, in his acknowledgments page. He's a part-time professor at Grossmont College in the San Diego area. He finally responded when I sent an email to his school account. Here's what he said. I have been contacted by key persons at Cal State Bakersfield who told me if anyone had any questions at all, to have them contact the legal counsel of the Chancellor's office. Who are the key people at this university that told him not to speak with me?
Well, for now, I can tell you that nobody at CSUB who would be authorized to give that guidance gave that guidance. So if that happened, I'm not saying it did or didn't, but whatever the circumstances, if that message got out there, it was from somebody who wasn't authorized to give that guidance.
I followed up with Dr. Beto, asking who specifically gave him that direction. He doubled down, saying that his board of directors made the decision they did based on the advice from the Chancellor's office there to not make any statements at this time. I'm very confused by that.
Me too.
You too.
Mm-hmm.
So this was a rogue actor.
I'm not going to characterize anything. I mean, I can tell you that as I've talked to the people who have been involved both at the university level and the Chancellor's office, this is not something that someone is aware of.
Dr. Beto never agreed to speak with me over the phone, but he did respond to more of my questions over email, insisting that, quote, the photo was from one of the royalty-free websites, something the Associated Press told me couldn't be so. When Dent ran into the same sort of blockades that I did, she drove down to Long Beach and spoke out during public comment at a meeting of the Cal State University trustees, a public meeting that is saved on YouTube.
I'm here because I have a code of integrity. I hope you have a code of integrity.
It was not long after this hurried presentation in Long Beach that Sky Dent received some disappointing news about the future of her education at CSUB.
The admissions committee has voted to deny you admission to the single subject credential program. We wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors.
Dent views this as retaliation for her speaking out about the book. The school told us they are looking into her claims and that they could not discuss an ongoing investigation. This was the familiar sight Tuesday morning for drivers exiting the West Side Parkway where it meets Truxton Avenue, a lane closed and a crew replacing damaged sections of the curved off-ramp. Despite signs and flashing lights warning drivers the parkway is ending, time and again, vehicles smash into the metal guardrail. According to receipts we got from City Hall, today was the 17th time since the parkway was built that officials paid to have the guardrail fixed. But what about the bill to taxpayers? Our records indicate that prior to today, the average cost of each of the repairs was close to $1,900. Not counting Tuesday's repairs, taxpayers have now spent more than $30,000 fixing the rail. So from there, we went to the Public Works Department. Director Nick Fidler says the ramp has been an issue for some time, but defends the structure itself.
Oh, it's not a design flaw. I mean, the ramp is designed per all state standards, federal standards.
He says the problem is the drivers.
It is designed at a fast speed, but they're either distracted with what they're doing driving or not paying close attention to all the warning devices that are out there.
Fidler believes that in the future, when the parkway is extended and this becomes a real exit, drivers will approach it differently. The first phase of the Centennial Corridor will widen the bridge and eventually extend the parkway through town, meeting up with the 58.
It'll definitely be an exit. You know, people will have to move over to that direction to exit the freeway itself.
The woman hidden behind the folder is Jana Bronson. On the day we shot this video in September, she was sentenced after pleading no contest to felony welfare fraud.
If you get this paid off, you can come back and ask the debt.
Over a period of about 4 years, investigators say she took in more than $25,000 in food stamps based on false information that she submitted on welfare forms. Lieutenant Hector Pantoja was one of the people who investigated her case.
She failed to report the income that the household was receiving.
By about how much? We're talking about just a little bit fudging it, or by a lot?
By a lot. The entire income of her husband.
That would be Sean Bronson, who investigators say lived with Jana and earned a considerable income working for the Department of Corrections.
So at the low end, close to $90,000, and the high end, $150,000. It's
unclear Sean's exact role in his wife's actions. He was not charged with a crime. Underreporting income is the most common kind of fraud, and like almost every other defendant, Jana Bronson chose not to fight the felony. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, 5 years of probation, permanent disqualification from state aid, and prosecutor Chris Steiger says she needs to repay the taxpayers.
Eventually, we will collect the money from her somehow, whether that's through tax intercepts or other ways. But
so it could take a while, but it's going to happen.
Yes, eventually.
After Bronson's case, we dug deeper, learning that she was just the tiny tip of a very large iceberg.
These are the welfare fraud cases that I will be filing for the month of September.
Steiger is the only district attorney who prosecutes welfare fraud.
I don't think the public has any idea how bad it is.
According to state records, Kern County discovered almost 1,700 welfare cases with evidence of fraud in the first 6 months of this year. In addition, more than 1,700 new applications were rejected because the agency suspected fraud.
Fraud is an issue that we're concerned about.
We took this information to Pam Hollywell. She's the assistant director at the Department of Human Services.
Do you think that taxpayers would be surprised to find that through the first half of the year, that 1,685 cases were flagged as having evidence of fraud?
I'm not sure what the public would think about that number. I would say that we have probably about 240,000 cases that we're serving, and 1,700 truly is a small percentage of that number.
In other words, 1,700 may seem like a lot, but it's actually less than 1% of the total caseload. And Hollywell had one other footnote as well. The Jana Bronsons in the court system are the exceptions, not the norm. The average fraud case is measured in hundreds of dollars, not thousands.
So if the average identified overpayment is $450, that tells me that we find it fairly quickly.
What does fraud, whether big or small, cost the taxpayers? For Kern County, $625,000 was given to people gaming the system in the first 6 months of the year. Statewide, that number rises to $29 million. And that's just what we already know about. Steiger's worried there could be a lot more. There's one reason why.
Is it true that there are fewer investigators now than there used to be?
Yes, that is true. Some of the funding that we have gotten from the state over time has decreased, and so we do the best we can with the benefits and the staff that we have to investigate it.
Do you see how that may be a little bit disconcerting, though, for people outside looking in?
I think those outside looking in, what I want them to know is that the District Attorney's Office and the Department of Human Services takes fraud, welfare fraud, any type of fraud, very seriously.
But the investigative team isn't the only one that's a bit too small for its job. Steiger is the only DA assigned to welfare fraud. Because of this, investigators this year have only been able to refer about 6.5% of the fraud cases to his office for prosecution.
We don't have the manpower to charge misdemeanors. If I file a case, it's a felony, just because we don't have sufficient investigators to charge all of the smaller dollar cases.
For the cases that do make it to court, Steiger has 4 goals every time.
Like I said, stop the bleeding, get the money back, get them disqualified, and some kind of punishment.
Record shows he wins almost every single case, but does he get the money back?
Ultimately, we will usually get all of it, but it may take a long time. Like I said, between tax intercepts, wage garnishments, grant adjustments, that money will, those restitution orders will follow that person the rest of their life.
Just because a fraud case was too small to justify a felony, that does not mean that taxpayers can't ever recoup the money.
We will continue to pursue and make sure that we receive back for our taxpayers all monies that are due back if they received a benefit that they weren't entitled to.
This is Melissa Eliot. She chose to speak with us as part of a deal offered by the district attorney that will lower her felony to a misdemeanor. This interview will be shared with the DA's office, who will use portions of it in a public service announcement to combat welfare fraud. Miss Eliot was charged with a felony after officials say she gamed the system to receive $15,000 in food stamps that she was not entitled to.
We were doing everything we could do, and it just wasn't enough, so I had to have the aid.
Even with her husband working, they couldn't quite make it. Making matters worse, they didn't quite qualify for aid either.
They told us that we made $50 too much. $50 too much. I can't provide food for my kids with $50. I can't. Not 3 kids.
So in a move she says she made out of desperation, she lied.
So I finally went back the next month and told him, you know what? My husband and I are separated. My mistake. I made that mistake. I admit it, and I apologize for it. That's why I'm going through this right now.
That change qualified her for aid, which she received for a couple of years, until an investigator paid her a visit.
They came to the house and said that they had checked out all our Facebook pages and said that we were still looking, you know, that we'd been posting stuff together.
Were you surprised by what the efforts that they'd gone to prove what you'd told them on the form?
Yeah, I was.
You didn't have any idea the government was checking out your Facebook page?
No, I didn't.
From there, it got worse quickly.
How long were you in jail?
Almost 4 days.
4 days, huh? What's that like?
It's horrifying. You know, hearing people yell and scream and cuss, and that's not where I want to be.
Looking back, I asked her how she'd act if given a second chance.
Is there anything that you would do differently?
Of course there is. I wouldn't lie. You know, I wouldn't lie on the application, no.
Melissa asserts that her family was not rich before the aid and was not rich after, and that the funds were not shared by her husband in a way they would be in a marriage that wasn't struggling. Her attorney, Amanda Austin, says those are important things to consider.
And I think as a society where certain people need help, we should just caution against assuming that there's this stereotypical person out there taking food from us, but instead look at them as people that need help.
When you go to the pharmacy with a prescription, you very likely use insurance to defray the cost. But sometimes insurance works against you. Here's Michelle Rivas with the California Pharmacists Association.
There's not a lot of understanding out there, which is understandable, about how the system works. I mean, you go, you pay, and you have no idea that you could get it for a lesser dollar amount.
As a patient, you pay premiums to your health insurance company. But there's a middleman between your insurance company and your neighborhood pharmacist. It's a pharmacy benefits manager that processes all of your claims that have to do with prescription drugs. And when you hand over a copay at the counter, that goes back to the middleman. And here's the kicker. That copay is often more than what it would cost to just pay cash for your medicine.
The patient will pay $30 when they could have paid $1.50 had they just paid cash versus using their insurance benefit.
So in many cases, it's more advantageous to skip the whole insurance process altogether. For medications you refill over and over, saving several dollars each time could really add up.
So if your pharmacist could be saving you so much money, why aren't they telling you this? The short answer is they're not allowed to. They're subject to what's called a Gag Clause in the contracts they sign with the middlemen.
The contracts that are entered into with the PBMs prohibit pharmacists from disclosing to the patient if there's a less expensive way for them to purchase their medications.
And speaking up when you're not supposed to has consequences. One pharmacist in Orange County spoke up and was greeted by a cease and desist letter from his middleman, warning him against disclosing pricing to clients, pharmacists, and elected officials. So what can you do? Be your own advocate. As long as you initiate the conversation, your pharmacist can make cash deals without getting in trouble.
It would be in their best interest to get in the habit of, when they're picking up prescriptions, to ask the pharmacist if there's a less expensive alternative to them for purchasing their medications.
We came up to Tulare County, to a spot just south of Porterville, to have a look at the Bryant-Kern Canal. This is one of two major canals that ferries water from the wetter north to the drier south. Much of the food that you eat and is grown in Kern County is reliant on the water taken from this canal. So much so that some would argue that this infrastructure is as important to the valley as Highway 99. But this water highway has a traffic jam. And to learn why, I met with Doug DeFlitch of the Bryant Water Authority. If this is a water highway, think of him as the highway patrol.
We all need to be together.
First, how does the Bryant-Kern work? It's built with a gradual slope.
So it has this gravity-fed portion that runs 6 inches per mile for the entire 152 miles.
But something called subsidence is interrupting the flow. Imagine if we removed 2 lanes from southbound Highway 99. Subsidence occurs when farmers and cities pump water out of the ground and don't replace it. The valley literally sinks. The U.S. Geological Survey has been tracking this problem for decades. Here are some photos taken around the valley that show how far we've sunk. In some cases, it's dozens of feet in elevation. So what's that got to do with the Bryant-Kern, our east side water highway? We built a little model to explain it. Imagine this Hot Wheel track is the Bryant-Kern Canal. Fresno would be up there, and Bakersfield is down here. Now, gravity is what keeps the water moving in the right direction, like so. But here's the problem. The land is sinking, which means that the water struggles to get from Fresno down to Bakersfield. Subsidence makes craters that throw off the slope, causing water to pool up instead of flow south. Now, you can't think about this as an isolated problem that you can fix with some dirt and concrete. This is dozens of miles represented here. But why should you care about the water that's stuck in this canal? I talked to a farmer about that.
I'm a third-generation farmer.
Craig Fulweiler has 1,000 acres in the Wasco area. He grows several things, but mostly almonds. The new state laws designed to help preserve our underground water make it imperative that Craig's almonds get water from the Bryant-Kern.
In order for that to sustain itself, there's got to be either more surface water come in, or there's going to have to be less water used.
Plans to make the valley sustainable, something that all farmers want, raise the uncomfortable prospect that without more canal water, some may have to farm less, or not at all.
That'll just have a huge rippling effect on our economy.
A careful study of crop reports and data that we collected from numerous water districts led us to this conclusion. The Bryant-Kern Canal contributes directly to roughly $2 billion of local crop revenue each year. And there's a larger economic impact when we consider the employment and commerce that farms and other ag businesses provide. We should consider taxes, too. Fallowing thousands of acres of farmland would result in a big loss of property tax revenue at a time when Kern's oil fields are also worth less.
This valley supplies food for the nation to a great degree, even worldwide. And so the benefits to even the United States is pretty great that this valley continues to maintain its productivity.
So to shore up the critical surface water supply, Bryant-Kern officials will do what they did in the 70s when a similar drought caused a similar problem. They'll raise the sides of the canal.
Bureau of Reclamation came in and did this liner extension. So that's what you're seeing above there is
the second line of concrete.
Is that second line of concrete,
so
right?
It's a slightly lighter shade.
It's a slightly lighter shade. You can see it's different. So the top of the canal used to be that part below there.
This is the first step, sealing the cracks between the old liner and the new liner added in the 70s. Doug calls this a baby step. Bringing the canal capacity up to where it needs to be, that's a tall and expensive order.
Back of the envelope conversations say in the $300 million range.
The farmers themselves can't shoulder a cost that great. So DeFlitch says local officials will lobby the state and federal governments to pick up the tab. A worthwhile investment, he says, in the food supply.
If you'd like your oranges to be a reasonable cost, if you'd like the food that you eat to come from a local supply and from your state of California, then you should care.
Now, your first question may have been similar to mine. Assuming we can come up with those hundreds of millions of dollars, what is there to prevent us from having to fix this canal again in 30 years? Well, in 2014, legislators in Sacramento passed a package of laws aimed at balancing our groundwater consumption, meaning that we have to put as much water back into the ground as we pump out. This will likely mean that in dry years, fewer people will be able to farm, and a lower supply could drive up food prices. but the hope is that the new rules will put a stop to subsidence.